Now I do my damnedest with vehicle maintenance to avoid problems on the road. And firstly, the vehicle was in absolutely excellent condition when it left the UK. The final service was done by another mechanic, so it's looked over by a second pair of eyes. And when I'm travelling, I absolutely force myself to do the regular checks, usually daily. I force myself to look under the bonnet and go under the vehicle, even when I'm hot, bothered and dusty. But in spite of this, I had a major problem, and that was a clutch failure, and we lost all drive. Now this was a bit of a mystery to me. Although I don't have the service records with me, I know the clutch is well under 100,000 kilometres old, should be good. I only use good quality parts, I'm very gentle on the clutch, careful with the gear changes, I don't do extreme off-roading, and I don't do heavy towing. I tow a 2-ton trailer from time to time, but the vehicle's rated for 3.5 tons. So this premature failure was a bit of a mystery. Sign of defeat, I have to call a local garage and get towed in. The owner owns a Land Rover himself and claims to be very well versed with these vehicles. It takes 5 mechanics to lower the transmission, a lot of force, I think not too much planning. I do that job by myself at home. We can now get at the clutch. Fortunately, I carry a used clutch plate with me. It's a little bit marked, it's got plenty of life left in it, and it'll do the job. Well, we got the clutch plate out, and what did we find? It is incidentally a Vallejo, good quality French make. Now firstly, the friction material is absolutely fine, hardly any wear whatsoever. As I say, I am gentle on my clutches, but the centre has failed. And 2 of these rivets have gone, and the centre's sprung open, and these shock absorber springs have started to come out. So what could cause this? Well, we went back and had another look at the vehicle, and we found that one of the bolts holding the adapter ring to the back of the engine has come out, no doubt shaken loose somewhere over the corrugations. I should have spotted this in my daily inspections, but failed to do so. My fault. Now I did have problems a few years back with one of the bolts loosening off, and I did the proper job. I tapped out the hole, put in 12mm bolt, and I drilled it to take a castle nut. I've had no problems with it ever since. Unfortunately, I can't do that in this case because there's very poor access on the left-hand side of the vehicle and I just can't get at it. All we've done for now is we've put in a 10mm bolt. I've torqued it up almost to the point of yielding, and it's got a nut and a lock nut. I am of course going to be checking it every day, but I think it will hold. African mechanics. Well, I may offend 1-2 people with what I'm about to say, but anyone who follows this channel knows I just call it the way it is. So be it. I had some idea what to expect from having watched Mike's channel on Britannica Restorations on YouTube, and he's had to deal with a couple of Africanized offenders. Now on the positive side, I will say there are some very good mechanics. For example, this guy in Windhoek, he only did small works on the vehicle, oil change, adjust wheel bearings, things like that. But you see that he worked with great care and precision, and I'd have no problem at all letting him do major work. And another guy called Andre Moster, whom I'll come back to later. However, for example, the people who did the clutch change in Zwartmund, well, they did a job, they got me moving again, and that's what African mechanics are good for. On the other hand, they also did a lot of things wrong, which came to my attention later on. So, for example, front prop shaft got put back in wrong way round. I saw these wires were loose and they go to the reversing indicator switch on the gearbox. I followed the wires to the other end and found they just cut it off. And another thing, the high-low range gear change, the way it's supposed to work is it's high back, low to the front, and the way they've connected it up, it's the other way round. God alone knows how they achieve that. And also little things like nuts and bolts. I tried to get them to put the nuts and bolts into little containers, but they didn't do it, just threw them all on the floor and then throwing it back together again. So for example, when they reconnected the clutch sleeve cylinder, they didn't have the right size washers. They put in oversized washers and butcher them to make them fit. How can you do that? But there was one other error they made which really came back to hurt me later on. Well, this is where the story gets really ugly. And if you don't want to hear the gory details, I suggest you jump ahead a couple of minutes in the video. About 2,000 kilometres after we did the clutch change, and by now I was in Oceancare on the South African border, I found that the rogue bolt between the engine and the transmission, the one I'd tightened up to within a millimetre of its life, I found it had loosened off again, so I had to tighten it. Trouble is, it's located tight up above the clutch slave cylinder and you can't get at it. And what you have to do is you have to loosen off the slave cylinder, ease it to one side, you can then get a ring spanner onto the nut and you can tighten it that way. So that was what I did. But as I was doing the work, I heard a metallic chink, and I think you can guess what happened. The push rod had dropped down into the bell housing. Why did that happen? Well, clearly it'd been reinstalled without the retaining clip in place. The retaining clip was there before, wasn't there now. What to do? I was in real trouble because the push rod had rolled down into the centre of the bell housing and I couldn't get at it. Fortunately, reception said they knew a local mechanic and he came out with a couple of assistants. I must say, when he got out of his vehicle, he seemed to me to be a bit of a loudmouth, redneck sort of guy. He said he had a bore scope and he'd be able to look inside the bell housing and recover the push rod like that. Sounded like a good plan to me, so I let him get on with it. Unfortunately, his idea of a bore scope was something like this. And what he did was he levered forward the cover plate on the front side of the adapter ring, and he tried to get the push rod out like that. Well, it never was going to work because the push rod's on the other side of the flywheel. Anyhow, he and his assistants jumped into their backy, they buggered off, never saw them again. And if by any chance you're watching this video, you know who you are, you're an absolute disgrace, and please don't call yourself a mechanic. At this point I decided I had to sort out the problems myself without being dependent on any local mechanics. First thing I had to do is get the slave cylinder off to give myself much better access. I had the most terrible struggle to disconnect the hydraulic fitting. When I got it off, I saw that the thread inside the slave cylinder was totally mangled, and to a lesser extent the thread on the fitting too. I don't know who the hell it was who worked on it last, but he did a terrible job. I now needed both a new slave cylinder and a new hydraulic line. After a lot of phoning around, I located a Land Rover workshop in a place called O'Keep, next to Springbok, over the border from where I was. I went down there. There's a very nice little workshop run by a guy called Andre Moster. He keeps some spare parts in stock. He didn't have this slave cylinder, and he very kindly removed the one from his own Defender to sell to me. Thank you, Andre, much appreciated. He was also able to recommend an excellent hydraulics company which made up a new line for me. I got these parts back to the campsite, installed them, filled it with fluid, bled it, and lo and behold, I was on my way. But what a palaver it all was. So what did I learn from this? Well, all of my difficulties arose from one easily preventable problem, and that is the propensity of this critical bolt to work itself loose, albeit everything was compounded by some shoddy work done by some fairly dubious mechanics. Apart from that, the vehicle was excellent and it absorbed all of the punishment that was thrown at it. So I guess my two takeaways are you've got to be extra attentive to preventive maintenance, and also if you can do the work yourself, please do so, because at least you know it's been done right. As a footnote, I just wanted to say, please let us not start a fruitless discussion about, oh, you shouldn't take a Land Rover on a major trip like this. The problem I encountered related to things shaking loose off the Daihatsu engine, nothing to do with Land Rover at all. If on the other hand people want to say it's a bit of a risk to take such an old vehicle or a hybrid vehicle on a major trip, yeah, they are valid points. Regarding the used clutch plate which I installed, I've been racking my brains as to what its history is. I know I took it out of the vehicle over a decade ago when I was doing some gearbox work, and I've carried it around as an emergency spare ever since, never thinking I was ever going to need to use it. It was a little bit marked, a little bit glazed. When we installed it, it grabbed a bit, but it's bedded in very nicely and it'll see me through to the end of the trip, no problem. But the point I wanted to make is it's quite a good philosophy to use take-out parts as emergency spares, because at least you know they're going to fit. There's nothing more frustrating than carrying new spare parts with you, and then when you really need it, you find they don't fit. Now the vehicle's in storage, and when I go back, I will take some 12mm bolts, castle nuts, and I will pre-drill the bolts, and we will get to the bottom of this problem. However, it's going to be quite a big job, because I've got to move the engine in order to get access to the bolt holes. But the point here is, if you've got any known latent problem in an expedition vehicle, you've got to get them sorted up front, otherwise they will fail later. Now when the vehicle finally gets back to the UK, I may actually swap out the engine. This engine's getting a bit tired and the oil pressure's a bit low. I got a spare one sitting in the garage there, and if I do that, I will look at installing an uprated heavy-duty clutch at the same time. But that's going to be a big job and a bit of fun for another day. Bye for now.